Living alone is not loneliness. Too often, people confuse solitude with emptiness, imagining that a woman who chooses to live by herself must be lacking something, or worse, waiting for someone to complete her life. But the truth is that living alone can be one of the most powerful experiences of self-discovery a person can ever have. It is not a punishment, and it is not a sign of failure. It is a conscious embrace of independence, peace, and growth. When a woman lives alone, she begins to experience life on her own terms. She does not have to compromise her mornings to suit someone else's routine. She does not need to negotiate how the living space should look, what should be cooked for dinner, or how she spends her weekends. The silence in her home is not an absence, but a presence, a space where she can hear herself clearly. For the first time, she realizes that the voice inside her is worth listening to, and she creates a rhythm of life that fits her deepest needs. This independence does not mean she has shut the door to companionship, family, or love. Instead, it means she has learned not to fear the absence of those things. She knows that love is most beautiful when it is a choice, not a requirement. When someone comes into her life, they are not filling a void but adding to a foundation that is already whole. A woman who lives alone knows that relationships are healthiest when they are chosen freely, not born out of desperation or fear of solitude. There is also a strength that develops in solitude, a kind of quiet courage. Living alone teaches her to manage her own life, to make decisions without needing constant approval, and to rely on her own resilience. She pays her bills, organizes her home, and takes responsibility for her safety. Every act of independence builds her confidence. She does not wait for someone else to protect her because she has learned to protect herself. This strength radiates beyond her personal life. It influences her work, her friendships, and her place in society. She carries herself differently because she knows she can stand alone. Many people fear solitude because they have never tasted its depth. They imagine it as silence filled with emptiness, but for the woman who embraces it, solitude becomes a garden. In that garden, she plants her dreams, her creativity, and her healing. She uses the time to read, to learn, to travel, to meditate, to decorate her space in ways that reflect her spirit. She is not burdened by constant noise, and in that quiet, she often discovers passions and talents she never knew she had. Solitude becomes fertile ground for personal growth. What others may call loneliness is often freedom in disguise. A woman who lives alone does not have to explain her choices to anyone. If she wants to stay up all night painting, she can. If she wants to travel on a whim, she does not need to ask permission. This freedom is not about rejecting connection, but about reclaiming her right to live without limits. It is about remembering that her time, her energy, and her space belong first to her. The misconception that living alone is sad comes from a culture that has always tied a woman's worth to her relationships. Daughter, wife, mother, caregiver. But the woman who lives alone is rewriting that story. She shows that a woman's value is not measured by her proximity to a man, but by the depth of her own character. She embodies dignity, independence, and self-respect. And so living alone is not loneliness. It is a form of empowerment, a declaration of self-trust. It is the realization that solitude is not a void to be feared, but a sanctuary to be cherished. The woman who embraces it is not missing out on life. She is living it fully, deeply, and authentically. Her life is not a waiting room for love or companionship. It is already complete. If someone enters her world, they are stepping into a space of strength, not filling an emptiness. She does not live alone because she cannot find someone. She lives alone because she has found herself. Freedom is sacred, not selfish. Yet so often, when a woman chooses to live her life on her own terms, she is told she is being selfish, stubborn, or incomplete. Society has long woven a narrative that a woman's highest purpose is to serve, to give, to belong to someone else. But when she steps outside of that mold and claims her independence, people misunderstand her choice as isolation, when in reality it is liberation. To live alone without a man is not a rejection of love, nor is it an act of rebellion. It is a recognition of freedom as something deeply valuable, something that allows her to breathe fully and walk in her own rhythm without apology. Freedom is sacred because it is the foundation upon which all genuine relationships must be built. A woman who lives alone learns this truth early. She realizes that freedom does not mean she is closing the door to companionship. Rather, it means she refuses to invite anyone into her life who would ask her to shrink. She knows that love is meaningful only when it grows in the soil of mutual respect, and so she guards her space fiercely, not because she wants to be selfish, but because she has discovered that peace of mind is priceless. Living alone teaches her lessons that few dare to embrace. She finds herself in the quiet, and in that quiet she hears her own voice more clearly than ever before. That voice tells her who she is, what she wants, and what she will no longer tolerate. There is nothing selfish in this clarity. In fact, it is the opposite. A woman who knows herself deeply is capable of offering love more freely and more honestly than someone who clings to relationships out of fear. Freedom shapes her into a person who can give without losing herself. Sacred freedom also dismantles the illusion that dependence equals security. Too often, women are pressured to believe that their value is tied to someone else's presence, that their home is incomplete without a partner's approval. But the woman who has walked the path of solitude knows a greater truth: security is born within. She learns to manage her own life, make her own decisions, and stand strong in her own presence. She sees that her worth is not measured by whether she is chosen, but by how she chooses herself every day. This realization is not selfishness, it is self-respect. And when critics accuse her of being cold, too proud, or detached, she smiles quietly because she knows that freedom has granted her something far richer than approval. It has granted her the power to live authentically, to wake up in a space she created, to follow routines that nourish her, to pursue goals that fulfill her, all without compromising her identity for acceptance. This is not selfishness, it is wholeness. For a long time, women have been asked to give until there is nothing left of them, to carry burdens that were never theirs, to silence their desires for the comfort of others. To choose freedom is to step away from that cycle and declare, I am worthy as I am. The sacred nature of freedom also lies in its ability to transform solitude into strength. Alone, a woman builds resilience. She discovers that she can face storms without leaning on someone to rescue her. She learns to repair, rebuild, and rise on her own. This inner resilience is not a wall against love. It is the ground that allows love, when it comes, to be a true partnership instead of a dependency. She will not accept chains disguised as affection because she has already known the beauty of walking unchained. In truth, freedom is not an escape from responsibility. It is an embrace of responsibility. It is the decision to own one's life fully, to be accountable for one's happiness, and to no longer outsource self-worth to someone else's opinion. When a woman chooses this path, she carries a quiet dignity that inspires others, even those who do not understand her. She becomes a living example that freedom is not a luxury reserved for a few, but a sacred right for all. And so, when the world labels her selfish, she does not bend to those voices. She knows that selfishness is the act of taking without regard for others, but freedom is the act of living without denying oneself. She knows that selfishness closes doors while freedom opens them. She knows that selfishness is rooted in fear while freedom is rooted in courage. The woman who lives alone, unafraid of her own company, proves to us all that freedom is not selfish at all. It is sacred because it honors the truth of who we are meant to be. Love is one of the most powerful forces in human life, but it is also one of the most misunderstood. For centuries, people have been taught to believe that love is something they must have, that their life is incomplete without it, that their value is defined by whether or not someone else chooses them. This belief has trapped countless men and women in relationships that drain them, suppress their individuality, and keep them from living fully. But the truth is different. Love is not a necessity, it is a choice. And when you realize this, it changes everything. To see love as a choice is to reclaim your freedom. It means you are not desperate for someone to come and fill a void in you. It means you are not walking around with a sense of incompleteness, waiting for another person to give you permission to feel whole. You begin to understand that wholeness is already within you. Love, when it arrives, is no longer about filling emptiness, but about sharing fullness. Two complete people choosing one another is far more beautiful than two broken people trying to patch each other's wounds. When you treat love as a necessity, you risk turning it into a prison. People stay in relationships that hurt them simply because they are terrified of being alone. They silence their inner truth because they fear rejection. They tolerate disrespect and neglect because they have been taught that having someone, anyone, is better than being by themselves. This is not love. It is dependency. It is fear disguised as devotion. And fear cannot create true intimacy, only change. But when love is a choice, the story changes. You no longer cling to relationships out of obligation or fear of loneliness. You choose to stay because it brings you joy, not because it keeps you safe from solitude. You choose to give because you want to, not because you need validation in return. You choose to remain with a partner, not because you are unable to stand alone, but because together you both rise higher. This is the essence of freedom in love, staying not because you must, but because you want to. This truth becomes especially powerful for women who decide to live alone. Society often pressures them with the idea that their worth is incomplete without a man. The narrative whispers that being single is a failure, that living alone is proof of being unloved or unwanted. But a woman who understands that love is a choice cannot be intimidated by this lie. She knows she can create her own life, build her own joy, and stand firmly in her own strength. If love comes, it will be welcomed. But if it does not, her life will still be meaningful, radiant, and whole. Choosing love instead of needing love also transforms the quality of relationships themselves. When two people come together freely, they are able to offer genuine respect. They listen not because they fear losing each other, but because they value one another's voice. They stay faithful not because of pressure or obligation, but because they honor the connection. They grow together not because they must, but because they choose to evolve side by side. This kind of love is not about survival, it is about creation. It does not suffocate, it inspires. The difference between necessity and choice in love is the difference between chains and wings. Necessity says, I cannot live without you. Choice says, I can live without you, but I choose not to, because life is better with you in it. Necessity says, stay with me or I will be lost. Choice says, stay with me because it brings us both joy. Necessity drains, choice empowers. So the truth about love is this, it is not something you must have to be whole. It is not a missing puzzle piece you need to search for in someone else. Love is an enrichment, a gift, a shared adventure. It becomes most powerful when it is entered into freely, not out of desperation. When we stop seeing love as a necessity, we no longer fear being alone. Solitude becomes a place of strength, not shame. Relationships become partnerships of equals, not battles of dependency. And women who live alone, who refuse to settle, who honor their independence, stand as living proof that love is not survival, it is choice. And only when it is a choice can love truly be love. Independence is power. And nowhere is this more evident than in the life of a woman who chooses to live alone without a man. For centuries, society has linked a woman's worth to her relationship status, teaching her that her identity is tied to being someone's daughter, wife, or mother. But when a woman decides to step outside of this expectation and embrace her own life on her own terms, she redefines power itself. Independence is not simply about being physically alone. It is about building the courage to stand tall, make decisions for oneself, and refuse to let fear dictate the course of life. The independent woman learns that her voice matters, even if it shakes when she speaks. She understands that she is capable of creating a life that does not require validation from someone else. When she pays her own bills, sets her own boundaries, and creates her own space, she is doing much more than surviving. She is thriving. Every choice she makes for herself reinforces the truth that she is not waiting for permission to live fully. She already holds the authority to shape her destiny. This independence is not cold or selfish. It does not mean she rejects love, companionship, or community. Rather, it means she enters relationships from a place of strength rather than need. She is not driven by desperation to fill a void. She is not silenced by the fear of being left alone, because she has already proven to herself that solitude does not break her. In fact, solitude has made her sharper, wiser, and more attuned to what truly matters. When she loves, it is a free choice, not an escape from emptiness. True independence also builds resilience. Life is never without challenges, but a woman who has learned to rely on herself carries within her the confidence that she can overcome whatever comes her way. She is not naive about the hardships of life, yet she does not crumble under them. She adapts, she grows, and she rebuilds. This resilience becomes her armor, but not one made of bitterness or cynicism. It is woven out of self-respect and trust in her own abilities. Independence gives her the quiet assurance that she can handle uncertainty without losing her ground. There is another layer to this power. Independence makes her unshakable in the face of control. Too often, dependency has been used as a weapon to keep women silent, to trap them in relationships or systems that diminish them. But the woman who is independent cannot be manipulated with fear of abandonment. She does not stay where her dignity is stripped away because she has already built a life that sustains her. Her strength disrupts the old narrative that a woman must endure anything simply to avoid being alone. She knows she deserves better, and she walks away with her head high. Independence also allows a woman to live authentically without the constant pressure to conform to others' expectations. She discovers who she truly is and what she truly wants. She fills her space with what gives her joy, not what pleases someone else. She shapes her days according to her own rhythm, not the demands of others. In doing so, she uncovers her unique voice, her passions, and her purpose. This authenticity is a form of power far greater than any approval she might seek from outside herself. It is the power of living a life that feels true. In the end, Independence is not a rejection of love or partnership. It is the foundation upon which healthy, equal relationships can be built. When a woman is independent, she does not enter relationships out of fear, but out of choice. She can give love freely because it is not tied to survival. It is an addition, not a lifeline. Her independence ensures that she is with someone because she wants to be, not because she has to be. That distinction is the essence of freedom. Independence is power because it transforms solitude into strength, silence into wisdom, and self-reliance into dignity. It breaks chains that once kept women confined and opens the door to a life defined not by dependency, but by courage and authenticity. To live alone is not to be incomplete, it is to be whole in a way that radiates confidence and resilience. The woman who embraces independence does not fear standing alone, for she knows she is already complete. Her life is proof that true power is not given, it is claimed. Solitude is one of the most misunderstood experiences of human life. Many people confuse being alone with being lonely, but they are not the same. Loneliness is an emptiness that aches for connection, while solitude is a fullness that allows the soul to breathe. A woman who chooses to live alone discovers that her solitude is not a punishment but a privilege. It is in the quiet of her own space that she begins to meet herself in ways the noise of the world would never allow. She discovers that being alone is not about the absence of others, but the presence of her own essence. When a woman embraces solitude, she finds that growth becomes inevitable. Every day she wakes up, she is accountable only to herself. There is no one else to impress, no mask to wear, no constant negotiation between her own desires and another person's expectations. In that space, she can hear the whispers of her inner voice. She can notice the longings she has buried under obligation, the dreams she set aside out of fear, and the talents she once dismissed because they did not fit someone else's definition of success. Solitude is a mirror, and though it may be uncomfortable at first, it shows her who she truly is. The strength that comes from this process is unmatched. Living alone requires resilience. There is no one to rely on when the sink breaks or when the silence of the night feels heavy. But each challenge faced alone becomes a badge of confidence. She learns she is capable of creating solutions, of carrying her own weight, of standing tall without a hand to hold her steady. With every small victory, her independence is strengthened. She becomes less afraid of life's uncertainties because she knows she has the capacity to adapt, survive, and thrive. Solitude shapes her into someone who is not only strong but also deeply self-assured. Growth in solitude is also spiritual. Away from constant distractions, she can connect with something larger than herself. For some, this might be God. For others, the universe, or simply the depth of their own soul. In the stillness, she begins to notice patterns, synchronicities, and truths that cannot be seen in the chaos of a crowded life. She realizes that silence is not empty. It is filled with wisdom. Her solitude becomes a classroom where she learns patience, mindfulness, and gratitude. She no longer rushes to fill every moment with chatter or company because she understands that silence itself has lessons to teach. Creativity, too, blossoms in solitude. Many of the world's greatest works of art, literature, and philosophy were born from the quiet hours spent alone. When a woman lives without the constant noise of another voice in her ear, her imagination has room to breathe. She may begin to write, paint, sing, or simply create a life that feels beautiful to her. Her solitude is fertile soil, and in it she plants the seeds of her own vision. She creates not because she must, but because she can, because her heart demands expression. Perhaps the most powerful growth that comes from solitude is emotional maturity. In relationships, it is easy to lose oneself in compromise or dependence. But when a woman lives alone, she has no choice but to face her emotions head on. If she feels sadness, she cannot drown it in distractions. She must sit with it, learn from it, and allow it to pass. If she feels joy, she learns to celebrate it without needing external validation. This self-reliance teaches her that her emotions are her own responsibility, and in mastering them, she becomes more grounded, balanced, and compassionate. Eventually, the woman who embraces solitude understands that she is not living without love. She is living with a deeper kind of love. It is the love of self-respect, the love of freedom, and the love of truth. And when love does come into her life, whether in the form of a partner or a friend, she welcomes it not out of need but out of choice. She does not cling to it in desperation because she has already proven to herself that she can stand alone. This makes her love stronger, healthier, and more authentic. Solitude, then, is not a void to be feared but a garden to be nurtured. In it, growth takes root in the most natural way. A woman who lives alone is not retreating from life but engaging with it more honestly than ever before. She is building herself from the inside out, layer by layer, until she no longer fears being alone because she knows she is never truly alone. She carries herself, her dreams, and her strength within her. And that is the truth. Solitude is growth, and growth is freedom. Fulfillment comes from authenticity. It is a simple statement, yet it carries a depth that many of us spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, trying to understand. To be authentic means to live in alignment with who you truly are, not with the roles society forces upon you, not with the masks others expect you to wear, but with the voice that whispers quietly inside your own soul. For women who live alone, this truth is especially powerful because their life is often a direct challenge to the traditional narrative. The world may try to convince them that living without a man is a mark of incompleteness, but in reality can be one of the deepest forms of self-respect and authenticity. When a woman chooses authenticity, she begins to realize that fulfillment cannot come from someone else filling the spaces within her. It comes from her ability to acknowledge her desires, her values, her wounds, and her dreams, and to build a life that reflects them honestly. Living alone creates the room for this kind of growth. It provides the silence to hear her own voice, the freedom to create her own patterns, and the courage to face herself without distraction. In that process, she discovers that fulfillment is not found in external validation, but in self-acceptance. To live authentically requires courage, because authenticity does not always please others. Many people are more comfortable when women follow a script: to marry, to nurture, to sacrifice, and to silence parts of themselves for the sake of fitting in. But when a woman steps away from that script, she sends a silent message to the world: I am whole as I am. That message can be unsettling, even threatening to those who cling to outdated beliefs. Yet it is precisely that authenticity that brings her the kind of fulfillment conformity never could. There is a difference between comfort and fulfillment. Comfort can be given, sometimes even bought, but fulfillment is earned. A woman who lives alone may not have the comfort of always being surrounded, but she gains the deeper fulfillment of knowing she can stand on her own. She is not defined by her relationship status, but by her integrity. She does not measure her worth by whether or not she is chosen, but by whether she herself chooses to live truthfully. This form of authenticity breeds confidence, and confidence breeds peace. Authenticity also means embracing imperfection. Too often, people confuse fulfillment with perfection: the perfect partner, the perfect home, the perfect image. But the woman who lives alone learns that authenticity is not about perfection at all. It is about honesty. It is about being real enough to admit fears, to recognize flaws, and to still stand tall in the midst of them. In doing so, she finds a fulfillment that no fast aid could ever bring. The peace of knowing she is living her truth outweighs the approval of others who might never understand it. Perhaps the most liberating part of authenticity is that it allows love to be a choice, not a dependency. A woman who knows fulfillment within herself does not seek someone to complete her, but someone who can complement her. She does not enter relationships out of fear of loneliness, but out of the richness of already being whole. In this way, her authenticity not only transforms her relationship with herself, but also elevates the way she connects with others. She demands respect because she already respects herself. She inspires love because she already carries love within her. Fulfillment that comes from authenticity cannot be taken away because it is not dependent on external factors. Jobs may change, relationships may shift, opinions may rise and fall, but the woman who is authentic remains steady. She knows that the foundation of her happiness is not what others give her, but what she has built within herself, and this inner stability becomes her quiet strength, her unshakable confidence, and her invisible crown. In the end, authenticity is freedom. It frees a woman from comparison, from dependence, from the endless chase for approval. It allows her to define success not by what she was told to achieve, but by what her heart truly longs for. It gives her the courage to live alone if that is what honors her soul, and to embrace companionship only when it aligns with her truth. In that freedom, there is no emptiness, only depth, no shame, only dignity, no loneliness, only selfhood. Fulfillment comes from authenticity, and authenticity is nothing more than the choice to live honestly, boldly, and unapologetically as yourself. A woman who understands this has already found what many spend their whole lives searching for. She has found wholeness, not in someone else's arms, but in her own being. And that is a truth that cannot be diminished because it is the essence of genuine freedom and the foundation of a meaningful life.